The Coleman family, rooted in a historic neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, had always been the embodiment of respect and community spirit. At the head of the family was Raymond Ray Coleman, a 70-year-old patriarch whose charm and generosity made him a beloved figure. Ray owned Coleman's Market, a small but thriving grocery store that had been passed down through generations. The store wasn't just a business, it was a community hub. Elderly neighbors came for friendly conversations, struggling families sought Ray's understanding for credit extensions, and children would often leave with a free candy bar in hand. Ray hosted annual barbecues, funded local school events, and contributed to church programs. He was a beacon of support in a neighborhood that faced its share of economic struggles. Ray's daughter, Lisa Coleman, was the pride of his life. A compassionate and hard-working nurse, Lisa had inherited her father's sense of duty. Her marriage to Darius Evans was a celebrated event in the community. Darius, a charismatic man with a troubled past, had risen above his difficult upbringing to become a well-loved presence in the neighborhood. Ray took Darius under his wing, guiding him in ways no one had before. The community admired their bond. Ray's mentorship of Darius symbolized his ability to heal and uplift those around him. But beneath this seemingly perfect picture lay tensions and desires that would unravel the lives of all involved. The connection between Ray and Darius began as one of mentorship. Darius, lacking a father figure growing up, sought Ray's guidance not only in life but in becoming a better husband to Lisa. They spent long hours at the grocery store after hours, talking over beers or sorting through inventory. Lisa initially felt grateful for this growing friendship. She admired her father's willingness to invest in her husband's growth and saw it as a sign of Ray's unwavering support. However, subtle changes began to unsettle her. Darius, once confident and easygoing, seemed nervous whenever Ray's name came up in conversation. There were moments of awkwardness at family gatherings, lingering glances, strained silences, and unexplained absences. Lisa tried to ignore her instincts, rationalizing these observations as her imagination running wild. But her unease grew, and one fateful night, Lisa gave in to her suspicions. While Darius slept, she scrolled through his phone. The messages between him and her father started innocently enough, but they quickly revealed a flirtatious, secretive tone. Phrases like, "You're the only one who gets me," and "I miss the way you look at me," left Lisa horrified. Her worst fears were confirmed. Her husband and father were having an affair. Lisa Coleman's discovery of the affair between her father, Ray, and her husband, Darius, was a devastating blow. She had always trusted Ray, the man who had been her protector and role model, and Darius, her partner and confidant. The revelation came not just as a betrayal of love, but as an attack on the very foundation of her life. Confronting Darius was an explosive moment. At first, he tried to deflect her accusations with denial, but when Lisa showed him the damning messages she had found, he broke down. In a tearful confession, Darius admitted to the affair. He claimed it wasn't just about lust, but an emotional connection that he felt with Ray, a bond he described as deeper than anything he had ever experienced. Lisa turned to her father for answers, hoping against hope that he would express regret or offer some explanation that could make sense of his actions. Instead, Ray's response was chilling. Rather than apologizing, he dismissed her pain. He told Lisa that she wouldn't understand, framing the affair as something beyond her comprehension. This cold detachment shattered Lisa. She was left feeling betrayed not only by the affair but also by her father's lack of empathy. The confrontation left deep scars, but Lisa chose not to reveal the truth to anyone, at least for the moment. She feared the scandal and the impact it would have on the family and the community, but her silence came at a price as the weight of the secret began to consume her. Lisa's resolve to keep the affair a secret began to crumble as the tension in her life grew unbearable. Ray and Darius, emboldened by Lisa's silence, continued their relationship with little regard for the emotional toll it was taking on her. Their actions became increasingly careless, further alienating Lisa and deepening her sense of betrayal. One evening, Lisa returned home unexpectedly early from her shift at the hospital. As she walked toward the living room, she heard hushed voices and muffled laughter. Peering into the den, she saw Ray and Darius seated close together, their physical proximity and demeanor unmistakably intimate. The sight was a dagger to her heart. Lisa's fury boiled over. She stormed into the room, confronting them with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Ray and Darius scrambled to explain themselves, but their excuses only deepened Lisa's pain. She accused them of selfishness and deceit, calling out their betrayal not just of her, but of the trust and respect they owed each other. This moment marked the breaking point for Lisa. No longer willing to carry the burden alone, she sought solace in her closest friend, Tamika. Tamika was horrified by the story and urged Lisa to take action. Together they decided that the affair needed to be exposed, not only to hold Ray and Darius accountable, but to reclaim Lisa's sense of agency and power. The decision to expose the affair was not an easy one for Lisa Coleman. Torn between protecting the family's reputation and reclaiming her self-respect, she chose the latter. The stage was set at a family reunion barbecue in the community park, a location symbolic of the Coleman family's status as leaders and caretakers of the neighborhood. Lisa carefully planned her confrontation, ensuring all key members of the community were present. As laughter and chatter filled the air, Lisa stepped forward, gathering everyone's attention. Her voice wavered but gained strength as she recounted the betrayal she had endured. The revelation was shocking. The affair between Ray Coleman, the family patriarch, and Darius, Lisa's husband, was a scandal that rocked the crowd. Gasps of disbelief were followed by murmurs of anger and disappointment. People who had admired Ray for years found it difficult to reconcile the image of the benevolent store owner and leader with the man Lisa described. Ray tried to interrupt, urging Lisa to stop, while Darius stood frozen, his face a mix of shame and fear. When Lisa revealed specific details, text messages, times they had been caught together, it silenced any doubts. The public exposure left Ray and Darius humiliated, their shame magnified by the crowd's judgmental stares. The fallout was immediate. Ray's once thriving grocery store began losing customers. Longtime friends stopped calling or visiting, unwilling to be associated with him. For Darius, the situation was even more dire. Neighbors whispered about him wherever he went, labeling him a homewrecker and an opportunist. In the weeks following the public exposure, the Coleman family disintegrated under the strain. Lisa moved out of her shared home with Darius, taking her son to live with her close friend Tamika. Though she felt a sense of vindication, the emotional toll was enormous. She experienced waves of guilt and second-guessed her decision to make the scandal public. For Ray, the loss of his reputation was devastating. The store that had been his life's work became a ghost town, with customers opting to shop elsewhere. He began drinking heavily, retreating from the community he had once helped build. Darius, now jobless and ostracized, moved into a small, run-down apartment. His relationship with Ray became increasingly strained. Blaming each other for their predicament, they began arguing constantly. Their once passionate affair devolved into bitterness and resentment. Lisa's son, caught in the middle, became withdrawn and angry. He struggled to understand why his family had fallen apart and why people he once admired were now spoken of with such contempt. The tension between Ray and Darius reached its peak one day during a heated argument in the empty store. Their shouting match turned physical, with accusations flying on both sides. Darius accusing Ray of manipulation and abandonment, and Ray blaming Darius for seducing him and ruining his life. The tension between Ray and Darius reached its boiling point on a stormy night that would forever change the community. The day had already been fraught with conflict. Earlier, Ray had tried to reach out to Darius, blaming him for the ruin of his reputation, while Darius, increasingly resentful, lashed back, accusing Ray of exploiting their relationship for personal gratification. Ray, unable to contain his frustration, consumed several drinks at home before deciding to confront Darius in person. The drive to Darius's modest apartment was treacherous due to the heavy rain, but Ray's rage fueled his resolve. When he arrived, the confrontation began almost immediately. Darius opened the door reluctantly, prepared for yet another argument, but this time the energy was different, more volatile. The heated exchange quickly escalated, with accusations flying on both sides. "You destroyed everything I built," Ray shouted, his voice slurred from alcohol. "And you used me," Darius snapped back. "You wanted the thrill, but when it all came crashing down, you left me to take the blame." Their voices echoed through the small apartment as the storm outside raged on. Neighbors later recounted hearing shouts, objects smashing, and what sounded like a scuffle. In a moment of uncontrollable fury, Ray grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Darius, realizing the situation had turned dangerous, attempted to push Ray away, but the altercation turned violent. In a tragic culmination of anger and desperation, Ray stabbed Darius. As Darius collapsed to the floor, clutching his wound, Ray stood frozen, the weight of his actions dawning on him. He muttered a panicked, "What have I done?" before fleeing the scene, leaving Darius to bleed out alone. When the police arrived, alerted by concerned neighbors, they found Darius lifeless on the floor. Evidence at the scene, fingerprints, the knife, and Ray's abandoned car nearby led them to Ray, who was arrested at his home without resistance. Ray's trial was the culmination of months of public speculation, media frenzy, and community debates. It became a spectacle, not just about the crime itself, but about the deeper moral questions surrounding the events that led to Darius's death. The courtroom became a theater for the painful unraveling of the Coleman family's life, and the emotions ran high on both sides. As the trial began, Ray's defense attorneys tried to portray him as a man pushed to the brink by overwhelming circumstances. They argued that Ray's emotional turmoil and long-standing issues, such as his feelings of inadequacy, stress from managing his store, and the fear of his public image crumbling, had clouded his judgment. They introduced psychological evaluations that suggested Ray had been struggling with depression and a sense of betrayal, which led to what they termed a moment of temporary insanity. They claimed that Ray didn't have full control over his actions when he confronted Darius that night. They also painted Darius as a manipulative figure who had knowingly inserted himself into the family's fragile dynamic, playing on Ray's insecurities to get closer to him. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a far darker picture. They argued that Ray's actions were premeditated and driven by malice. The prosecutor argued that Ray had been unable to handle the collapse of his comfortable life and had resorted to violence as a way to regain control. The murder was not a rash act born of passion or momentary confusion, but the result of a toxic mix of jealousy, rage, and a desire to punish Darius for what Ray perceived as an attack on his family's integrity. They pointed to Ray's previous interactions with Darius, where he had often been dismissive and resentful, and his own words during police interrogation, where he had confessed to the crime with no signs of remorse or regret. Witnesses were called, and the testimony in the courtroom was harrowing. Lisa, devastated and still reeling from the events, was called to the stand. She spoke about her relationship with Ray, their years of marriage, and the ultimate betrayal she felt when she discovered his affair with Darius. Her testimony was raw and emotional, as she recounted the devastation of finding out about the affair, the humiliation of seeing her husband's life unravel, and the toll it took on her family. She explained that the affair was only the surface of Ray's struggles, but it was the final straw in a long list of unresolved issues. She spoke about her belief that Ray's inability to cope with failure, whether in business or personal life, had created a man who could no longer tell right from wrong. Perhaps the most devastating testimony came from one of the neighbors who had witnessed part of the confrontation through a cracked window. They described seeing Ray and Darius shouting at each other, the heated exchange growing more and more violent. The witness heard the sound of a scuffle, and a few moments later saw Ray running from the apartment. They called the police after realizing something was terribly wrong. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a man who had snapped, but not because of some emotional breakdown. Instead, they argued, Ray had decided that Darius was no longer useful to him. He was an obstacle, someone who had brought Ray's secrets to light and shattered his carefully constructed world. The murder was Ray's ultimate way of silencing Darius and taking back control. Throughout the trial, the community's emotions were also deeply divided. Some still saw Ray as a figure they could trust, a man who had once been their neighbor, a friend, and a leader, but others could not reconcile the image of Ray as a murderer with the man they had known. In the media, debates raged about what led a man who had been such an integral part of the community to commit such a brutal crime. After weeks of testimony, the jury finally deliberated. The verdict came down on a tense afternoon, guilty of second-degree murder. While the jury found that Ray had not planned the murder in advance, they determined that his actions, fueled by intense emotional distress and his sense of betrayal, had led to the fatal confrontation. Ray was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a blow to his supporters, who had hoped for leniency, but it provided some sense of justice for those who had long felt that Ray's actions were inexcusable. The trial was not just a verdict on a man's crime. It was a public dissection of his life, his failures, and the way in which betrayal had ultimately consumed him. Ray was left to reflect on the choices that had brought him to this point, but for many in the community, the trial's outcome wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long period of grieving and reckoning. With Ray's conviction, the long-standing tensions within the community finally reached their breaking point. The small town, once united by shared experiences and history, found itself divided, some in support of Ray, others in condemnation, and many left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been upended by the scandal. The story of Ray and Darius was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a symbol of a deeper fracture within the community. Ray's grocery store, once a bustling hub where neighbors caught up on local gossip and exchanged goods, was left to languish. No one wanted to shop there anymore, not out of animosity toward the store itself, but because it had become a physical reminder of the fractured family and the bitter drama that had consumed the town. The store closed within weeks of Ray's arrest, the shelves slowly stripped bare, the cash registers silenced, the building was left to decay, and the block that once felt like home to so many was now a ghost of its former self. Families that had once gathered for weekend barbecues or annual block parties now avoided one another. The local church, once a place of solace, saw a decline in attendance. Members who had once been close found themselves questioning each other's loyalties. Had you supported Ray? Did you believe in his innocence? Or had you known the truth all along and stayed silent? The children who had grown up playing together now attended different schools or stopped speaking altogether. The bonds that had once felt so unbreakable were now fragile, torn apart by the pain of what had happened. Some of the town's younger residents spoke of how their parents had tried to shield them from the reality of the situation, but others had overheard the whispers, heard the discussions, and saw the look of distrust in the eyes of their neighbors. Yet there were still those who tried to hold on to the idea of community. They tried to organize meetings, town hall discussions, and even support groups, hoping to heal the wounds that had been inflicted, but it was never the same. The town had changed irreparably. The weight of Ray's actions had broken something fundamental in the fabric of the place, and no matter how much time passed, the scars remained. Years passed after the trial, but the legacy of the Coleman family and the tragedy that unfolded remained a defining part of the community's history. For some, it was a cautionary tale, a constant reminder of the dangers of secrets and unchecked emotions. For others, it was a painful chapter in a past they wished they could forget. Lisa, who had once been seen as the strong, resilient woman holding her family together, had retreated from the public eye. She had moved to a different town, hoping to find peace and rebuild her life away from the scrutiny and heartache that had consumed her. However, the memories of her marriage, her betrayal, and her husband's violent action stayed with her, marking her more deeply than she let on. She struggled with the loss, not just of Ray, but of the dreams she had for their life together. Though she found some solace in new friendships and a quieter life, the memory of Ray and the pain he caused never fully faded. For Ray, life in prison was one of solitude. His once dominant presence in the town had diminished to that of a forgotten figure, someone whose name was only remembered in whispers or through legal documents. He spent his days in reflection, writing letters to Lisa that went unanswered, often confronting his own guilt and sorrow. There were no visits from former friends or neighbors, and Ray became a man of faded reputation. In the quiet of his cell, he thought often about the choices he had made, the affair, the lies, the violence, and wondered if there could have been a way to undo it all. For the town, time did little to heal the deep divide. The once thriving community remained fractured, with some people never fully recovering from the betrayal they had witnessed. The story of Ray, Lisa, and Darius became an indelible part of the town's folklore, told and retold in hushed tones, a symbol of the destructive power of secrets, ambition, and unchecked emotions. Local schools included the tale as part of their curriculum, often using it as a case study in moral decision-making. Students learned about the complexity of human emotions, about love, jealousy, and betrayal, and the far-reaching consequences of actions driven by anger and pride. But even as the community tried to move forward, the Coleman saga continued to resonate. It was a legacy of tragedy, a story of a man's fall from grace, and the irrevocable consequences of his decisions. It was a story that no one could forget, one that lingered in the minds of those who lived through it, forever shaping their understanding of trust, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. Years passed after the trial, but the legacy of the Coleman family and the tragedy that unfolded remained a defining part of the community's history. For some, it was a cautionary tale, a constant reminder of the dangers of secrets, unchecked emotions, and the consequences of betrayal. For others, it was a painful chapter in the past they wished they could forget. Yet, the events surrounding Ray, Lisa, and Darius continued to haunt everyone involved, from the family to the community to the viewers who followed their story. And now, we turn to you, our audience. What do you think? Why do you think something like this happens? What makes a person act out in ways that seem incomprehensible? Was Ray justified in his actions? Can betrayal ever truly be understood, or is it simply something that destroys everyone in its wake? Is there a moment in our lives where something so small, a lie, a betrayal, a moment of weakness, can spiral out of control and lead to actions that are irreversible? What do you think pushed Ray to the edge? Do you believe that someone could have stopped him before it was too late, or was this tragedy inevitable? If you have thoughts or theories about the underlying causes of this heartbreaking situation, leave your comments below and share your insights with us. We'd love to hear your perspective. Like and subscribe if you want to stay updated with more content that explores the complexities of human emotion, betrayal, and redemption. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of our deep dives into these intense stories. Now, as you think about the lessons from the Coleman family saga, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in their shoes? How much pain can a person endure before they break? Let's discuss in the comments, because the story isn't over. It's still shaping us today, and together we can explore why people do the things they do. Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.